The Scavenger, Istanbul, 2016. Once she hung up the phone with her mother, Perry made her way down the main staircase adorned with faux Grecian urns, across the polished marble floor and back to the dinner table. A part of her was disappointed not to have got Shireen's number. Another part was relieved. She had no idea what she would have said and, even if she'd found the right words, whether Shireen would have listened. She had called her a few times in the past, soon after she had left Oxford, but Shireen had been too angry to talk, the wound too raw. Although years had passed since, there was no guarantee that it would be any different now. The guests' laughter grating in her ears, Perry entered the dining room only to find the PR woman standing by the drinks cabinet, waiting for her. "Hey, I called my brother while you were away," the woman said with a smile that did not quite extend to her eyes. "He was delighted to hear you were at Oxford around the same time that he was." "I'm sure you two knew people in common." Perry returned her stare with equal intensity. "Maybe, but Oxford is a big university. I told him you had a photo of the scandal professor." He was very surprised. Perry clenched her jaw as she braced herself for what was coming. "What was he called?" "My brother mentioned it but I forgot." Perry said, his name burning her tongue like a drop of fire. "Exactly, I knew it was weird." The PR woman snapped her fingers to punctuate her point. My brother was curious, he wanted me to ask you, were you his student?" "No, I didn't know the professor that well," Perry said without missing a beat. "The girls in the photo were his students. I was just a friend. Lost touch with all of them anyhow." "Oh," said the PR woman, disappointment darkening her expression but not yet ready to let go. "Try Facebook. I've reconnected with all my college friends, even ones from primary school. We have pilaf and beans days." Perry nodded, eager to get rid of this woman who, like a hostile army that invaded her land, was pillaging her privacy, her past. She would never tell her how many times she had Googled Az's name, his achievements, his books, his photos, and pored over the hundreds of entries about him, and then Googled the scandal, after which he had stopped teaching but continued to give interviews and talks. "My brother said he remembers hearing rumors that there was a Turkish girl taking this professor's course. He said it was the talk of the town." Tension filled the space between them like a filthy puddle. "What are you trying to say?" Perry asked, amazed at the coldness in her voice. "Nothing, I was just curious." The image of the tramp flashed before Perry's eyes. His gaunt frame, his penetrating eyes, his eczema-patched hands. This woman, though privileged and moneyed, was no less of an addict than he was. Perry imagined her holding a plastic bag full of other people's misfortunes and dark secrets into which she poked her nose and inhaled as a respite from her own life. "I wish I had something more interesting to tell you," Perry said, the word interesting making her pause for a split second. Her remark, though intended for the busybody, seemed addressed to no one but herself. "I was a quiet student, not the type to be involved in a scandal." The PR woman smiled as though in sympathy. "Next time you talk to your brother, tell him it must have been someone else." "Oh, sure." For the rest of the dinner, Perry avoided making eye contact with the PR woman. She didn't feel bad about lying. She was not going to reveal her past to a stranger, especially to a scavenger type of a stranger hunting for bits of gossip to feed on. Besides, it wasn't exactly a lie, come to think of it. After all, it had been a different girl, a different Perry from the woman she was today, who had once been Professor Az's favorite student and, later on, the cause of his ruin. The dusk-run Oxford, 2000. Back at college, Perry burrowed herself into her studies. In the mornings when she picked up her coffee, so unlike the sweet and strong Turkish coffee, she would observe the undergraduates and the dons with absorbed expressions on their faces, books and notes clutched to their chests as they hurried from one building to another. She would wonder how many of them had had a taste of life elsewhere. How easy it was to assume that Oxford, or anywhere, for that matter, was the center of the world. On Wednesday, she left the library at dusk. She had been reading for almost 3 hours and her brain was saturated with ideas. She imagined her mind as a rambling house with many rooms in which she stored all the things she read, heard, and saw, and where they were inspected, processed and registered by a little clerk, a homunculus entirely at her unconscious service. Yet it was possible, she believed, that one's thoughts could be hidden even from oneself. She decided to go for a run. After a quick stop by her staircase to drop off the books she had borrowed and change into her running clothes, she set off down Holywell Street, slowly finding her rhythm. The cold wind on her face was like a bomb. Cyclists passed silently by, their reflectors winking conspiratorially in the dark. People rode everywhere, to shops, restaurants, seminars, and one of her favorite sights was seeing the senior dons on their bikes, their gowns billowing gently in the wind. She herself was not a good cyclist. It was one of those things she had to work at, like happiness. Having veered off her usual course, she dashed through streets and alleys that felt deserted. She inhaled the smell of anonymous winter plants, turned a corner, and stopped, panting hard. She found herself face to face with a poster on a wall. The Oxford University Museum of Natural History presents The God Debate. Professor Robert Fowler, Professor John Peter and Professor Az Azza come and join a spectacular debate among the brightest minds of our time. Spiri's eyes widened. She checked the time and location printed on the poster. It was the same day. 5 p.m. Museum of Natural History. It had already started. The place was at least 2 miles away, and she had no ticket and no money on her even if tickets were still available. She had no idea how she would get in, and yet, on the spot, she turned in the direction of the museum, took a deep breath and began to run. The third path. Oxford, 2000. By the time Perry, her hair disheveled and rivulets of sweat running down her neck, reached her destination, the sun had already set in a low amber sky. She approached the neo-Gothic edifice that had been designed as a cathedral to science. Architecture in Oxford fell into 2 categories, the kind that remembered and the kind that dreamed. The Museum of Natural History was both. The gravel crunching beneath her feet, Perry thought that the building, independent of the collections inside, demanded of its visitors awe and respect. There were 2 attendants, a girl and a boy, at the main entrance. Students by the look of them, wearing the same bright blue shirts and bored expressions. One of them nodded in her direction. I came for the debate, Perry said, trying to catch her breath. Do you have a ticket? Asked the boy, a gangling youth with a protruding lower lip and a narrow forehead that was crowned by bushy ginger hair. No, Perry said anxiously. And I don't have my wallet with me. It'd have made no difference. He shook his head. Sold out weeks ago. Words, of their own volition, spilled out of Perry's mouth. Oh, but I ran all the way here. At Perry's response, so loud and spontaneous, the girl smiled with sympathy. It's about to end anyway, you're late. Clinging to a thread of hope, Perry asked, can I at least take a peek? The girl shrugged. She had no objections. But the boy was of a different mind. We can't allow that, he said, with the tone of someone who, having unexpectedly found himself in a position of authority, was determined to make the most of it. The debate's being recorded. There'll be a free screening later on, Thagirl suggested. Perry was not satisfied. Even so, she nodded. Okay, thanks. She turned back. Sulking in the faint glow of dusk, she had the look of a disappointed child. If anyone had asked her why she was so keen to go inside, the only answer she could have come up with was instinct. Something told her that many of the questions that had been tugging at the recesses of her mind were being addressed in there. It was this conviction that prompted her to do what she did next. Instead of heading towards the main road, Perry wandered around in search of a side door. There was no need. Another opportunity to get in arose when she noticed, gazing back over her shoulder towards the entrance, that the girl was no longer there. The other attendant waited for a few seconds, and then disappeared into the building. On impulse, Perry took advantage of the unguarded doorway and entered the museum. Once inside, she moved cautiously, her senses alert as she half expected the ginger-haired boy to pounce from behind a corner and throw her out. But he was nowhere to be seen. Following the signs that said God Abate, she soon found herself in a large, crowded hall. In tight rows, an audience of students and academics sat with rapt attention, their gazes fixed on the four figures on stage. One of them was a prominent BBC journalist moderating the discussion. He seemed to be wrapping up the event. Perry studied the three professors, wondering which one was the first professor, a tall, gaunt man with slanting, intelligent eyes, had a bald head and a spreading, salt and pepper beard, which he fiddled with nervously whenever he heard something not quite to his taste. A grey suit, pink check shirt, red braces with metal clasps, and a hint of belligerence that slipped now and then from under his elaborate smile. He stared at his hands most of the time, as though they held a mystery he was hopeful to solve. The second professor, the oldest of the three, had a broad face, ruddy complexion, thinning grey hair, and a paunch he forgot to hide when he became excited. He wore a russet jacket that he found either constricting or uncomfortable in some other way, for he seemed ill at ease, hunched in his chair, his gaze unfocused. To Perry he seemed a gentle type, the sort of man who would rather spend time with his students or his grandchildren than debating God on a podium. The third speaker, sitting apart from the others to the left of the moderator, had brown blonde hair falling in elegant waves over his collar and a prominent nose that was finely poised between the hideous and the magnificent. His eyes shone like specks of obsidian behind his classic black and tortoiseshell frame spectacles as he stared out at the audience with a world-weary smile. Perry could not decide whether his placidity was the sign of a soul at peace with itself or the reflection of a well-polished hubris. It was equally hard to guess how old he was. There was a taut litheness in his posture that suggested he was younger than the others, and his demeanor projected a spiritedness that might or might not have been due to his relative youth. Perry was certain he was the professor Shireen had been raving about. "I believe I'm speaking for everyone present when I say we've had a fascinating discussion, some provocative ideas to chew on," enthused the moderator. He seemed rather exhausted and relieved that the event was coming to an end. Perry wondered what had transpired before she arrived, sensing a groundswell of tension under the veneer of academic courtesy. Now it's time to open the floor to the audience. Some basic rules: keep your questions brief and to the point. Please wait for the roving mic and don't forget to introduce yourselves before you speak. A ripple of excitement traveled across the hall, like a breeze over a field of wheat. Immediately, a few hands went up, the brave and the bold. A male student was the first to go. Briefly introducing himself, he unleashed a tirade about the dichotomy of good and evil, beginning with ancient Greece and Rome up to the Middle Ages. By the time he had reached the Renaissance, the audience was getting restless, and the journalist interrupted, "Okay, sir, did you have a question in mind or are you planning to give a secular sermon?" Laughter rose. The student blushed, and when he finally parted with the microphone, still having not asked a question, it was with visible reluctance. The next person to stand up was a cleric in a black cassock, an Anglican pastor perhaps. Perry could not tell the difference. He said he had enjoyed the panel debate but was astonished to hear the first speaker claim that religion brooked no free discussion. The history of the Christian Church was replete with counter-examples. The seeds of many universities across Europe, including their very own, had been sown through theology. Atheists were entitled to their opinions so long as they did not distort the facts, he concluded. A brief exchange followed between the cleric and the bearded professor, whom Perry understood was the atheist in question. The professor said that religion, far from being an ally of free discussion, was its age-old nemesis. When Spinoza questioned the teachings of the rabbis, he was not commended for his intellect, instead he was expelled from the synagogue. The same troubling pattern could be seen in the history of Christianity and Islam alike. As a man devoted to science and clarity, he could not be placed under the sway of dogma. The next audience member to reach for the microphone was an elegant middle-aged woman. "Science and religion could never be bedfellows," she said, citing examples of philosophers and scientists, East and West, who had been persecuted by religious authorities throughout history. She railed at the second professor, who, Perry realized, besides being a famous scholar, was a man of considerable piety. The second professor, though not as eloquent as his atheist peer, spoke mildly in a rich Irish brogue, enunciating each word slowly, like a delicacy to be savoured. He said from his point of view there was no conflict between religion and science. The two could go hand in hand, if we only stopped thinking of them as oil and water. He personally knew of several scientists, experts in their fields, who were devout Christians. As Darwin, who had never considered himself an atheist, argued, it was absurd to doubt that a man could be both an ardent theist and an evolutionist. Many scientists hailed as staunch atheists today were, in fact, theists in heart. Meanwhile, Perry, not having found an empty seat, leaned against Thule. She scrutinized Asa, who was listening to the exchange, his hair drifting across his forehead, his face lit with an enigmatic gleam and his skin resting in his palm. He wouldn't be able to stay in this position for long. The next question was directed at him. A young woman in the front row rose to her feet. Shoulders squared off, her black ponytail catching the light from the ceiling, she stood firmly upright. Even when her back was turned, Perry could see it was Shireen. Professor Asa, as a free spirit, I have a problem with the religion I was born into. I can't stand the arrogance of so-called experts or thinkers or the self-serving platitudes of imams and priests and rabbis. Excuse my French, it's a total fucking charade. When I read you, I find a voice that addresses my anger. On sensitive matters you speak with conviction. And do show me how to empathize with others. When you sit down to write, do you have a specific reader in mind? Asa tilted his head to one side with a gentle smile of understanding and complicity, a nuance of expression that escaped Perry's notice. At the edge of her vision, a blue-patterned shirt had distracted her. It was the male attendant she had met outside. Fearing he was looking for her, she shrank back against the wall. But the young man, his face glowering with unmistakable hostility, was staring at the stage, his jaw clenched, his eyes glued on one speaker in particular. As soon as Shireen sat down, the same boy lurched forward, zigzagging through the audience. He stopped next to Shireen, closely leaning in as he asked for the mic. Perry had no clue about what was passing between them, but she could see Shireen's back stiffen. Grabbing the mic nonetheless, the boy turned towards the panelists, his booming voice almost a shout. I've a question for Professor Asa. Asa's face darkened. His nod, slow and deliberate, suggested he knew the young man. I'm listening, Troy, he said. Professor, you wrote in one of your earlier books, I believe it was Smash the Duality, that you'd not engage in debates with atheists or with theists, but here you are doing exactly that, unless I'm addressing a clone. What has changed? Were you wrong back then, or are you making a mistake now? Asa gave him a smile, different from the one he had offered Shireen, that exuded cold confidence. You are entitled to criticize my words so long as you quote them truthfully. I did not say I'd never debate with atheists and theists. What I said was, he arched an eyebrow. Does anyone have a copy? I need to see what I said. Laughter broke out. The moderator handed him a book. Promptly, Asa found the page he was looking for. Here it is. Clearing his throat, rather theatrically, Perry thought, he began to read. The prevailing question whether God exists elicits one of the most tedious, unproductive, and ill-advised disputations in which otherwise intelligent people have been engaged. We have seen, all too often, that neither theists nor atheists are ready to abandon the hegemony of certainty. Their seeming disagreement is a circle of refrains. It is not even accurate to call this battle of words a debate, since the participants, irrespective of their points of view, are known to be intransigent in their positions. Where there is no possibility of change, there is no ground for a real dialogue. Asa craned his head and scanned the audience before he closed the book. You see, participating in an open debate is a bit like falling in love. His voice was serene, his gestures emphatic, smooth, plentiful. You are a different person by the time it comes to an end. Therefore, my friends, if you are unwilling to change, do not enter into philosophical arguments. That's what I said in the past, and that's what I'm saying right now. Pockets of applause rose from the audience. I'm afraid we are running out of time. One final question from our listeners, announced the moderator. An old man stood up. May I ask the distinguished scholars if they have a favorite poem on God, whether they believe in him or not? The audience stirred in their seats with anticipation. The first professor said, my favorite poems tend to change as time passes, but at the moment I'm thinking of a few verses from Lord Byron's Prometheus. Titan. To whose immortalize the sufferings of mortality seen in their sad reality were not as things that gods despise, what was thy pity's recompense, a silent suffering, and intense, the rock, the vulture, and the chain. I'm not at all good at memorizing poems, the second professor said. I'll try. T.S. Eliot. Many desire to see their names in print, many read nothing but the race reports. Much is your reading, but not the word of God. Much is your building, but not the house of God. Though it was his turn, Asa remained quiet for what seemed like a second too long. Into the expectant silence he said, mine will be from the great Persian, Hafiz. I might change the words somewhat, since, as you know, every act of translation is a lover's betrayal. He spoke so softly that Perry had to lean forward in order to hear him. She noticed several in the audience doing the same thing. I have learned so much from God that I can no longer call myself a Christian, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Jew. The truth has shared so much of itself with me that I can no longer call myself a man, a woman, an angel, or even a pure soul. As he uttered these verses, Asa lifted his eyes and stared straight ahead over the audience. Although he was looking at no one in particular, and seemed at equal distance from his admirers and critics, in that instant Perry could not help but feel that his words were aimed at her. The moderator stole a glance at his watch. We have time for one last remark from each speaker, he announced. Gentlemen, how would you summarize your views in one sentence? The atheist professor said, I'll repeat a well-known quote and leave it at that. Religion is a fairy tale for those who are afraid of the dark. In that case, atheism is a fairy tale for those who are afraid of the light, countered the pious professor in his soft Irish burr. All heads turned to Asa. Actually, I quite like fairy tales, he said, full of mischief. My colleagues here are equally misguided. One wishes to deny faith, the other doubt. They seem not to understand that I, as a simple human being, need both faith and doubt. Uncertainty, gentlemen, is a blessing. We do not crush it. We celebrate it. That's the way of the third path. On that note, I'd like to thank our distinguished guests and bring our discussion to a close. The moderator jumped in, worried that Asa's remarks might spark a fresh outburst. He commented that today's event was a perfect example of a sincere, uncensored, and open debate in the best British and Oxford tradition. Let's have a warm round of applause for all our speakers. And don't forget, they'll now be signing their books. The audience broke into a prolonged applause. Then, those keen on wanting signed copies rushed towards a stall piled high with the professor's books, while others made their way towards the stage, hoping for a personal word with one of the speakers. Some stayed seated, whispering among themselves. The rest of the audience shuffled steadily towards the exit. In the meantime, the three speakers moved to the table set aside for them. A yellow rose had been placed in front of each by the organizers of the event. Perry inched forward with the crowd, eavesdropping on conversations to her left and right. Just before she was swept out of the hall, she stopped and turned back as though she wished to gather every detail within the reach of her gaze. She watched the moderator thrust his notes into his briefcase. She watched the two older professors chat with their readers. And she watched an untidy queue of admirers form in front of Asa, until he disappeared little by little amidst the stream of bodies. The Optimizer, Istanbul, Oxford, 2001. The first term ended in a blur. Perry, home for the Christmas holidays, persuaded herself that her father's health had not worsened and that her mother's preoccupation with hygiene had not turned into an obsession. The entire house smelled of bleaching powder and lemon cologne. Draped over every radiator were drying clothes, washed so often that their patterns and collars had all but faded, tiny pools of water gathering underneath like tears shed for things gone by. On New Year's Eve they were in front of the TV, father and daughter munching roasted chestnuts as they watched a belly dancer, Menser's traditional way of celebrating the arrival of a new year. Selma, as always, had gone to her room early, not to sleep but to pray. With both Umut and Hakan gone, it was only the two of them, father and daughter, just like in the past. They did not speak much, as if between them silence had a language of its own. It was the rituals, their rituals. Perry had missed most, taking long walks by the sea, cooking menemen, playing backgammon on the card table next to the cactus in the window. A week later Perry returned to Oxford. 2 consecutive trips to Istanbul having drained her budget, she was determined to get a part-time job. There was also one more thing on her mind, to find out more about Professor Eza. The spring term began with fresh hopes and fresh decisions. Perry made an appointment to see her tutor for academic advice. A man with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanently distracted air, as if he were trying to solve a quadratic equation in his head. Dr. Raymond was short in stature and firm-jawed. He encouraged every student he worked with to find the perfect schedule to optimize his or her intellectual resources. In return, undergraduates had a nickname for him, Sir Optimizer. Dr. Raymond and Perry spoke at length about which courses she should take in her second year. Not that there was much flexibility. The program was more or less fixed, with only a few minor adjustments allowed. There's a seminar I was hoping to take. Everyone says it's great, Perry said briskly. Well, not exactly everyone, but a friend of mine does. And which seminar might that be? Dr. Raymond asked, taking off his glasses. Over the years he had seen, time and again, students misdirect on another. What worked for one person brought misery to someone else. Besides, young people had a tendency to change their minds as often as they changed their top 5 songs. The course they went into raptures about at the beginning of the term, they lambasted at the end. In his 23 years as a fellow of the college, he had arrived at the conclusion that it was best not to give students too many options. Choice and confusion were conjoined twins. Unaware of the thoughts crossing her tutor's mind, Perry carried on, a series of seminars on God. The professor's name is Eza. Do you know him? Dr. Raymond's mouth, fixed in an amiable smile, twisted downwards almost imperceptibly. Only the slightest twitch of an eyebrow gave away his discomfort. Oh, I know of him, who doesn't? Perry's mind raced as she attempted to deconstruct the intonation of this apparently simple remark. She had come to learn that the English had an indirect way of expressing their opinions. Unlike the Turks, they did not communicate resentment through resentment or anger through double anger. No, there were layers to their conversation. The deepest discomfort could be conveyed with a reticent smile. They complimented when, in truth, they wished to denounce. They clothed their criticisms in cryptic praise. If a gave a bad performance on stage, Perry thought to herself, in Turkey, they'd pelt me with twigs of prickly holly. In England, I imagine it'd be with roses, confident that I'd get the message from the thorns. Totally different styles. In the meantime, Dr. Raymond paused, mulling over how best to approach a delicate issue. When he spoke again, he articulated each word carefully, like a parent explaining an unwelcome fact of life to a sullen child. I'm not entirely convinced that this would be the right choice for you, but you said I could choose a subject of interest as long as it was on the options list, and this one is. I checked it. Perhaps you could tell me why you want to take this seminar. The subject is important to me for family reasons. Family reasons. God was always a contentious issue in our house. Or religion, I should say. My mother and father have conflicting views. I'd like to study it properly. Dr. Raymond cleared his throat. We are lucky to have one of the world's greatest collection of books. You can read on God as much as you want. Wouldn't it be better to do that under the guidance of a professor? It was a question Dr. Raymond preferred not to answer, and he didn't. Eza is very knowledgeable, that's for sure, but I must warn you, his teaching method is, how shall I put it, unorthodox. It doesn't work well with everyone. This seminar divides students, some enjoy it, others become profoundly unhappy. They come to me to complain. Perry sat still. Oddly, Her advisor's lack of enthusiasm had whetted her curiosity. She was now even more eager to take the seminar. Bear in mind it's a small class. Asa accepts few students and he expects them to attend every week and to do all the reading and assignments. It's a lot of work. I don't shy away from hard work, said Perry. Dr. Raymond heaved an audible sigh. Well, by all means go and talk to Asa, ask him to show you the syllabus. He couldn't help adding, if he hasten, that is. What do you mean, sir? Dr. Raymond paused, disquiet passing across his usually genial features. Then he did something he had never done in his long years as an Oxfordian, to speak negatively to a student about a colleague behind his back. Look, Asa is seen as a bit of an oddball around here. He believes he is a genius and geniuses think they're not bound by the rules of common people. Oh, Perry gasped. But is it true? Is what true? Is he a genius? Dr. Raymond realized that his cynicism had backfired, and whatever Hess said next might drive him further into a corner. His solemn expression changed to one of lightheartedness. It was meant in jest, a joke. I see, Don T. Rush, take it easy, Dr. Raymond said, putting his spectacles back and signaling the end of the conversation. See how you feel about it first. If in doubt, come back and talk to me, we'll easily find you another option. A more suitable one. Perry jumped to her feet, having heard only what she wanted to hear. Great, thank you, sir. After Perry left, her advisor's lips turned downward in contemplation. His jaw set even more tautly, his nostrils flaring and his fingers laced together under his chin. He sat in his armchair for a while, motionless. Finally, he shrugged, deciding he had done what he could. If that silly girl was going to bite off more than she could chew, she would have only herself to blame. The youth Istanbul, 2016. Denise, standing behind Perry's chair, leaned down, gave her a cursory peck in the cheek and whispered into her mother's ear, Mum, I want to leave. Her face caught the light from the Murano chandelier. Her friend was by her side, twirling a strand of hair around a finger. The two teenagers looked bored. Much as they craved inclusion in the grown-up world, it was obvious they found it dull and perhaps predictable. Salim is going to take us home, Denise added. She wasn't asking her mother for permission, only informing her. Theo, their girl, the daughter of the bank CEO, was also coming, a last-minute sleepover. They had made their plans. Probably they would stay up late listening to music, texting their friends, nibbling midnight snacks, laughing at people's Instagram photos and YouTube videos. Nonetheless, Denise would be complaining, a barrage of grievances having accumulated in her breast as if it were a detention center she lived in and not the house of her loving parents. Okay, sweetheart, Perry said. She trusted her husband's driver, Salim, who had been with the family for long years. You can leave early, Dad, and he won't be late. The guest smiled. A few rolled their eyes. It was a familiar conversation to anyone with teenage children. Ciao, girls. The CEO waved from his corner. Let me walk you girls out, Perry said, as she pushed her chair back. Adnan rose to his feet. No, you stay, darling. I'll do it. His eyes lit up as their gazes met. He did not seem upset about the Polaroid anymore. He had dropped the subject. He was good at that, knowing when to let things go, unlike Perry. Effortlessly he smiled at her, the smile that meant he was assuming responsibility and putting things in order. Level-headed and sensible, Adnan enjoyed solving problems, and if he couldn't solve them, he knew how to manage them. So different from Perry. For her, problems were like insect bites, she'd scratch and scratch away at them. She could neither allow them to heal nor leave them alone. Whereas he liked to repair broken things, and broken people. How else to explain his attraction to instability, Perry thought. How else to explain his attraction to me? As her husband and daughter passed by, Perry stood up. She kissed Adnan on the lips, even though she knew some guests would regard it as poor etiquette and others as indecent behavior. Thank you, darling. Sometimes when she thanked him for the small things in life, she sensed in truth She was thanking him for those larger things that were better left unexpressed. Yes, she was grateful to him, grateful to the fate that had brought him to her. But, then again, she knew gratitude was not love. Listen to me, Mouse, there are two kinds of men, the breakers and the fixers. We fall in love with the first, but we marry the second. She hated to think that life, her life, had vindicated Shireen's theory. Her eyes brimming with affection, Perry smiled at her daughter. She was about to give Denise a hug, but something in the girl's expression said, "Mum, please don't, not in front of this group. I love you," Perry said quietly. Denise paused for a second. "Love you too. How's your hand?" Perry turned over the bandage, dried blood on the edges. "It's fine. It'll be as good as new tomorrow. Just don't do it again," whispered Denise, as if she were the concerned mother and Perry the wayward daughter. Then cheerily she said to the guests, "Good night, everyone. Don't smoke. Remember, it's bad for you." "Good night," came a chorus of voices. "Oh, youth," said the businessman's wife as soon as the teenagers left the room. "How I wish I could rewind time. 60 is the new 40. "It's all lies. Speak for yourself," said the businessman to his wife. "I'm as young as a freshly minted coin. Watch out, I might divorce you and get myself a younger model." The journalist gave a false cough. "It's an Eastern phenomenon, though, I mean, early aging. Look at Westerners. All wrinkles and gray hair, still touristing abroad. It's embarrassing to see American oldies mobbing our Hagia Sophia and hopping over the stones at Ephesus. What do they call themselves? Grey Panthers. I've yet to see a 70-year-old Middle Easterner traveling the world. Turks, Arabs, Iranians, Pakistanis. We have big ideas about the world, but we never see it." The architect, who had displayed his nationalistic sensitivities throughout the evening, glowered at him. The businessman's wife, suddenly busy texting on her mobile phone, lifted her head, her face glowing. "Good news, everyone. The psychic is 10 minutes away. I just got his message." "Lovely," said the PR woman as she leaned back in her chair. "We've so much to ask him. The kids have left, our drinks are refreshed, now we can start talking naughty. I'd love to dig out a few secrets tonight." So saying, the woman winked at Perry. A gesture she left unreturned. The colorful stranger, Oxford, 2001. Having never had a job before, Perry was baffled as to where to begin looking for one. Yet she was bent on finding some kind of employment despite the demands of her timetable, not to mention her student visa, which only allowed her a limited number of hours of work a week. So she went straight to her exuberant friend, who had an opinion on everything, even on matters she knew nothing about. "You must have a CV," Shireen opined, "that shows your work experience, but I have none to make it up. Who is going to check whether you waitressed at some pizzeria in Istanbul? You want me to lie?" Shireen rolled her eyes. "Oh, the power of semantics. Sounds awful when you put it that way. Use your imagination, is all I'm saying. It's a bit like applying makeup to your biography. Don't tell me you're against makeup." For a fleeting moment the two women stood staring at each other's faces, one painted, one free of all cosmetics. It was Shireen who broke the silence. "I think I'd better give you a hand." Early next morning Perry found an envelope pushed under her door. Apparently, Shireen had already prepared a CV for her. A minute later, Perry was at her friend's door, knocking. The second she heard a faint mumble coming from inside, she dashed in, waving a sheet of paper. "What is this? I haven't done any of these things." From Shireen, still in bed with her head buried under a pillow, came a muffled, "Ugh. I knew it, kindness never pays off." "I appreciate your help," said Perry. "But this says I was a bartender in a trendy underground bar in Istanbul until it burned down. An arson attack, and that I worked in the library of Ottoman manuscripts, specializing in palace jesters and eunuchs. Oh, one more, that in the summers the first took care of an octopus at a private aquarium." Shireen, sitting up in salmon pink satin pajamas, pushed up the blindfold from her eyes and giggled. I might have got carried away with that last bit, only with the last bit. How do you think this nonsense is going to help me to find a part-time job? It won't. But it'll make you a foreign curiosity. Trust me, educated Brits get a thrill out of multiculturalism. Not too much, though, just enough. People like you and me are allowed to be a bit eccentric. It makes us fun to be around. So you might as well play it up, take advantage of it. If foreigners aren't going to bring excitement and good food, who wants them in England? Perry was silent. Listen, what do you think the average Brit knows about your country? They assume everyone over there is either swimming with dolphins and dating calamari or wearing burqas and chanting Islamist slogans. Perry blinked as a surfeit of images filled her head. What I'm saying is they either have a sunny impression, sandy beaches and Eastern hospitality, that kind of shit. Or a gloomy one, Islamic fundamentalists, police brutality and Midnight Express. When they want to be nice to you, they throw in the first. When they want to challenge you, it's the second. Even the most educated are not immune to cliches. Shireen stood up to wash her face in the sink by the wall. Like it or not, sister, what you hear from my mouth is the cold hard truth. You must stand up against stereotypes, and this is the way to do that, through falsification. Perry asked, glancing at the CV in her hand. That's one fucking way, said Shireen, running her fingers through her hair, droplets of water clinging to her chin. Guiltily motivated, Perry took to the streets with her CV. At first, she searched for signs posted in shop windows that said, "Help needed." There were none. Mustering her courage, she entered a cake shop and spoke with manager. She was politely rejected. Next, she tried her luck at the pub she had been to with her parents. Same outcome. The third place she called in was her favorite bookshop, Two Kinds of Intelligence. The owners were not surprised to hear Perry's inquiry. Students were always stopping in looking for a part-time job. Have you worked anywhere before, dear? Said the husband. Perry hesitated. I'm afraid I haven't. But you know I love books. The wife smiled. This is your lucky day. We've been looking for someone to help us out over the next few weeks. We can't promise to keep you on after that. Maybe every now and again when things get busy. What do you think? Sounds perfect. Perry said, hardly believing what she'd just heard. As she was leaving the shop, she spotted, there on a shelf, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, her father's beloved poet. With an introduction by the translator Edward Fitzgerald and filled with illustrations, the beautiful old edition was irresistible. Luckily, they offered her a nice discount. Outside, it started to drizzle. Thin, lukewarm drops that brightened her mood. She smiled, put her CV inside the book and checked her watch. Still an hour before her next tutorial. It occurred to her she had enough time to go and find Asa, to get the syllabus for his seminar on God. From all that Shireen had said about him, not to mention her own mixed feelings as she had watched him on the panel, she slightly dreaded meeting him in person. Still thinking of the professor, she opened at random the book of poems which were Khayyam's breath and soul. Love. Could thou and I with fate conspire to grasp this sorry scheme of things entire? She read the lines carefully, slowly. Was there an omen here of things to come? If so, what could it be? Had her father seen her searching for a sign in the words of a poet who had lived almost 1,000 years before, he would not be pleased. But Perry did not think she defied her father's golden rule by consulting Khayyam. That's why I love poetry so, she murmured to herself. I can't see, hear, smell and taste poems. All my senses are at work, trust me Baba. It was time, therefore, that she finally came face to face with the professor. Part 3. The Sisk in Oxford, 2001. Not knowing where to find Professor Asa, Perry hazarded a guess that she would be able to track him down at the divinity school. If he taught God, surely that was where he should be. Grand and modest, This medieval building was the oldest structure in Oxford built for lecturing and teaching. From a distance, with its compound arches, carved wooden doors and flying buttresses, it resembled less the feet-off architecture that it was than a delicate watercolor by a dreamy artist. A drowsy expectation hung in the air, as though the ancient stones, having tired of decades of tranquility, were awaiting something, or so it seemed to Perry as she approached it on that particular day. Something drew her inside, something soaring and spiritual in the sublime lines of the 15th century vaulted ceiling. No one stopped her going in, and there seemed no one in the long room illuminated by perpendicular-style windows, except for a student sitting cross-legged on the floor, immersed in a book. At Perry's footsteps he glanced up. Under the light slanting through a high window, his features were blurred for a second, and then became visible, the narrow forehead, the ginger hair, the freckled cheeks. It was the attendant who had stopped Perry at the entrance to the God debate, the attendant who had taken a swipe at Professor Azure in front of everyone. She remembered his name, only because it was the same as the ancient Turkish city of Troy. "Hello," Perry said cautiously. "Hi there." The smile on his face was one of recognition. "You were at the museum the other day. Do you work there?" Perry asked. "Nope, only volunteering. I'm a lowly undergraduate, just like you." Perry half expected him to reprimand her for sneaking into the debate, but either he had not spotted her, or he simply preferred not to bring the subject up. Instead he chatted nonchalantly, asking her where she came from and what she studied. Now that he was stripped of any vestige of authority, he was approachable, even affable. "I'm looking for Professor Azza," said Perry, when the conversation hit a lull. "Do you know where his office might be?" Troy's face remained motionless for a moment. His voice, when he spoke again, sounded hollow, like a balloon that had fizzled out. "You won't find him here. These are university offices nowadays. Why are you looking for him anyway?" Not expecting to be questioned, Perry's voice faltered. I'm interested in his seminar." "Don't tell me you are planning to take God." "Why not?" Perry asked. "What's wrong with it?" "Everything," Troy said. "The guy's a wolf in professor's clothing. You don't like him. He kicked me out of his class. I'm suing him, by the way. Going to take him down in court." "Wow, didn't know students could do that," said Perry. "I mean, sorry to hear you had a problem." Troy echoed the word with disdain. "Azza is the devil himself. Mephistopheles. Do you know who that is?" "Sure, from Faust." Troy looked pleasantly surprised that a Turkish girl would know about Faust. "Look, you seem nice, but you're a foreigner, you won't be able to tell just how insane this man is. You have to listen to me. Stay away from Azza." "Well, thanks for the warning," Perry said, whatever sympathy that had formed between them ebbing away. "But I'll decide for myself." Troy shrugged. "Okay, it's your choice. He has rooms at his college. The entrance is on Merton Street. In the front quad, find the third staircase on the left. At the open entrance you'll see a list of names painted white on black." Perry thanked him, though deep within she thought it was rather odd that they was so eager to guide her towards a man he regarded as the devil. Antique desk, every inch covered with more books. Red slips of paper poked out from between their pages, like miniature tongues sticking out in mock surprise. The armchair, the sofa and the coffee table, even the hand-woven scarlet rug, were covered with volumes and volumes. If ever there was a shrine dedicated to the printed word, this was it. But it was neither the abundance of books nor the disarray in the room that had stopped Perry in her tracks. There was a bird, a siskin with yellow-green feathers and a forked tail, trapped inside. It must have flown in through the window and was flapping around, searching frantically for the freedom it must have just lost. Perry took a few tentative steps and held her breath. Cupping her hands, she tried to catch the delicate creature as eagerly as she could, but the bird, terrified by her presence, was now in a crazed state. In circles of panic, It darted from one corner to the other and at times came tantalizingly close to the open window, yet failed to discover the way out. Moving deftly, Perry put the copy of the Rubaiyat down on top of a pile of books and tried to push the old, heavy window up further. But the sash must have been jammed from above, for it could not be forced any wider. She wiggled it with all her strength. The bird, scared witless by the noise, darted by her and threw itself against the glass, beyond which, so close yet so distant, was the infinite sky. Trembling from the impact, it landed on a shelf close enough for Perry to be able to see its bead-like eyes, gleaming with terror. She looked towards the dainty creature with compassion, its distress and the alien surroundings all too familiar to her. Perry searched around for a tool that might help her to release the window sash. As her eyes scanned left and right, she detected a smell she could not quite identify. Mingling with the musty scent of books was the sweet sour fragrance of decaying grapefruits in a bamboo bowl, their pastel brightness in contrast with the earthy hues dominating the room. Beyond that there was another scent. It didn't take her long to discern the source. There, on edge, an incense stick burned in a bronze holder in which a finger of ash had formed. She found a metal letter opener, its sharp end perfect for unscrewing the clasps that she could see were holding the window. Once she unfastened the frame on each end, she gave one last push. The window slid upwards halfway, more easily than she had thought. Now all she needed to do was to direct the bird towards what had become a bigger possibility for escape. Taking her sweater off, she began to wave it in the air. "Is this a new dance or something?" a voice inquired from behind. Perry was so startled that she let out a gasp. When she turned around, she saw Professor Aziz standing in the doorway, one arm resting on the doorframe, watching her, his lips twisted in amusement. Up close his long brown hair had golden overtones, like gilded threads woven into a dark tapestry. He was not wearing glasses today. Oh, I'm terribly sorry," she blurted out, taking a step towards him and immediately taking a step back. "I really didn't mean to barge in without permission." "Then why did you?" he asked, sounding genuinely keen to know. I saw this bird." "What bird?" Perry pointed to her left, where the creature had been a moment ago, but now there was only empty space. She glanced around nervously. The siskin had disappeared without a trace. "It must have left through the window while we were talking." For one full minute he stood silent, eyes focused and emanating a strange familiarity, as though she were yet another book he had read in times past that he was now trying to recall. Finally, he said, "That was amber, by the way." "Excuse me." "The incense you were looking at," he said. "Thursdays are amber. I burn different kinds on different days. Do you like amber?" Perry's heart skipped a beat. Yes, she knew about the power of amber. Roman women carried balls of amber. Some say for the fragrance, others, for protection against witches. Perry's eyes widened. She couldn't tell whether it was the effect of choice warning or something in Aziz's presence, but she felt flustered. "Don't tell me you're afraid," he asked, sensing her discomfort. "Of amber? Of witches?" "Of course not," Perry said quickly. A voice inside told her that if he had seen her examining the incense, he must have been here long enough to see the bird. "Again, Professor, I'm very sorry for having entered your room." "How often do you apologize?" Asa asked. "Twice in 3 minutes. If that's your average, it's a bit too much, don't you think?" Perry blushed. He had a point. She apologized excessively, for being a few minutes late to an appointment, for letting go of a door she was holding for the next person a second too soon, for passing someone on the pavement, for barely touching a shopper with her trolley in the supermarket. She said sorry all the time. "Here's a hypothesis," said Asa, flipping his hair out of his eyes. "People who apologize unnecessarily are also inclined to thank unnecessarily." Perry swallowed hard. "Maybe they're just anxious souls trying to get by. They do what they can to keep up with others, but they know there's always a gap." "What sort of a gap?" asked Asa. "Like we don't really belong," said Perry, and immediately regretted what she said. Why was she revealing her feelings to this man, who was not only a stranger but also a professor, twice removed from her world, as a walked past Perry, sat behind his desk, scribbled a note on a piece of paper and pinned it on the laundry line above his head. So you're worried that the other students might think you're not one of them? An imposter pretending to be like everyone else? You think you're different, possessed? Weird. Crazy. I didn't say that, Perry objected. Every muscle in her body felt tense, waiting for the next blow. Oblivious to her reaction, he said, "Tell me, what makes you think you didn't deserve to be at Oxford?" "I didn't say that either." Her stare fell on the scarlet rug that reminded her of the carpets back home. "People here are so smart," she said to her feet. "You're not." "I am, but I need to work hard. The other students, they adapt easily to university life. Whereas for me it's more complicated," said Perry, only now remembering why she had come here. "Actually, I'd like to see the details of your seminar on God." Dr. Raymond suggested that I should ask you directly. Dr. Raymond. Asa sounded as if he didn't think much of her moral tutor, her academic advisor, but he did not dwell on it. Instead he pulled out a note from a leather-bound book, scanned it with a grimace, screwed it into a ball, threw it deftly into a waste-paper basket and announced, "You reconsidering it for the Michaelmas term, I suppose? The seminar is full and there's a waiting list." This Perry wasn't expecting. Now that she had been told the seminar was beyond her reach, she was itching to get in. "However," said Asa, seeing her disappointment, "there's one student who will have to drop out. So we might have an opening at some point." Perry's face lit up. Underneath her eagerness, she felt a tad uneasy as it occurred to her that the student to whom he referred was probably Troy. "There was a boy, yes, he's angry and aggressive," Asa said. "The angry and the aggressive cannot study God." Silence extended between them, unfolding like a scroll. From behind his desk, Asa fixed his eyes on Perry. "Now tell me, why do you want to attend this seminar?" "In my family, faith is a divisive subject. My father is your parents aren't here. I'm asking you. Well, I've always felt ambivalent about matters of faith, and also curious. I need to clarify my thoughts. Curiosity is sacred. Uncertainty is a blessing," Asa said, repeating the views he had expressed at the panel. "As for clarifying your thoughts, I am the last person in Oxford you should come to for that." Outside a bird chirruped and Perry wondered if it might be the siskin, back in the nature that, though full of danger and savagery, was nevertheless home. In her distraction she didn't notice the professor leaning forward, aching for the book of poems she had laid down. "Aha! What have we here?" "I say, an old edition of the Rubaiyat," Asa said. Before she could react he had already opened it and found the sieve inside. "Oh, that's just a," Perry stumbled. With a mixture of delight and disbelief, Professor Asa scanned the page that Shireen had prepared. Well. You have taken care of an octopus." Perry froze. "Mysterious creature, extremely intelligent," he said. "About 2/3 of its neurons reside in its tentacles, as I'm sure you know, having no other option," Perry agreed. "Do you think the arms of an octopus have minds of their own?" asked Asa. To Perry's relief, he didn't seem to expect an answer. For decades people thought the larger an animal's brain, the cleverer it was. They associated intelligence with brain size. How sexist. Men have more brain tissue than women. Then comes the magnificent octopus, debunking myths with its 6 arms, not 8, by the way. People mistakenly count the legs. What if, instead of a big clunky centralized brain, a complex network of multiple brains was the next step in evolution? A subtle thrill of excitement spread through Perry, almost against her will. She enjoyed listening to him. She realized since it gets smarter with age, if it only lived longer, the octopus would be the most brilliant species on Earth. But Aristotle, that greatest of philosophers, thought octopuses were dumb. Now what does that say about Aristotle? Perry had the strangest feeling that wherever this conversation was heading, it was not about a philosopher and a mollusk anymore, but about Asa and herself. She said, that Aristotle was wrong, maybe biased. He thought there was nothing interesting about the octopus, he already knew what there was to know. So he failed to see it was full of wonders. The professor smiled. That's right. Perry, he said, glancing at her Nemean the resume. Just like Aristotle's octopus, God is an enigma that calls for exploration, but it's different. We don't need to believe in an octopus, we know it exists. Whereas with God, we can't even agree on whether there is one or not. Asa frowned. My seminar has nothing to do with belief. We're seeking knowledge. A firmness in his voice. Brooding and impatient. Perry suspected that when he talked to himself, while working late into the night or walking on dew-soaked mornings, this was the tone he used. The seminar on God is a meeting of curious minds. We come from all sorts of backgrounds, but we have one thing in common. The spirit of inquiry. It is a program that requires a lot of reading and research. I don't care whether you're a believer or not. Amongst my students, there is only one sin, laziness. Perry asked, cautiously, and the syllabus. Oh, the holy syllabus. Asa thundered. Academia abhors improvisation. Undergraduates must be told what they'll be reading every week, one must give them a month's notice. Otherwise, they'll panic. Thus saying, he opened a drawer, took out a sheet, put it inside the rubaiyat and handed it to her. Here it is, if you must, he said. The CV hecked for himself. Thank you, Perry said, even though she suspected the document she held was no more representative of the truth than the CV Shireen had prepared for her. Before you go, Asa said, you said you were confused and curious and you seem to make things complicated for yourself. These are the three Ks essential to an honest study of the possibility of God. You mean confusion and curiosity and complicatedness. Some call it chaos. Asa added. Anyone who has the necessary Cs is in a good position to study God. Not sure whether that meant she would be admitted to the seminar, but feeling the need to thank him nonetheless, Perry smiled and gently closed the door on Asa. As she crossed the quadrangle, she glanced back towards the building, trying to find the window that had trapped the siskin. Her eyes traveled across the weathered facade and fixed on one glazed sash, behind which the professor's shadow glided past, like a fleeting thought. But perhaps it was only her imagination. The Holy Syllabus Entering the Mind of God/God of the Mind, Honor School of Philosophy and Theology, Thursdays 2 p.m., 4:30 p.m. Lecture Room, 10 Merton Street. Seminar description. In this course of weekly classes we shall address questions of growing relevance to a large number of people around the world today. Our aim is to equip ourselves with the necessary intellectual tools for better understanding and to encourage a free debate devoid of all manner of bigotry and dogmatism. Students are expected to read, research, ruminate on and respect opinions that they might not personally share. This seminar does not promote any particular religion or adhere to any particular view. Whether you are Jewish, Hindu, Zoroastrian, Buddhist, Taoist, Christian, Muslim, Tibetan Buddhist, Mormon, Baha'i, agnostic atheist, New Age practitioner or about to initiate your own cult, you will have an equal say. In the lecture room we hold our discussions sitting in a circle so that everyone is equidistant from the center. Seminar objectives: 1. To promote empathy, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom safas, in matters pertaining to the notion of God. 2. To provide students with a wide array of answers to the most demanding questions of our times. 3. To encourage students to think critically and carefully about a topic that is important not only in theology or philosophy, but also in psychology, sociology, politics, and international relations. 4. To approach universal dilemmas without mechanical repetition, lack of information, fanaticism, and fear of offending others. 5. In short, to confuse and to be confused. Seminar materials: the reading lists will be tailored individually according to your determination, diligence and academic performance. Be prepared to be assigned materials that may be at odds with your own beliefs and to comment on them, e.g. atheist students might be given books by pious authors, Theist students will study works by atheist scholars, etc. What to expect from this seminar? Since God is our main subject, this seminar is open-ended, with no beginning and probably no conclusion. It is up to the student to decide how much to take from the experience and how far to journey. A. The cranes. Those who, dissatisfied with flying at average altitudes, aim to rise above everyone else, including their tutor. They will ask for additional readings, question the questions, demand intellectual challenges, soar over the mountain passes. B. The owls. Not as ambitious as the cranes, the owls are nonetheless great thinkers. Instead of devouring hundreds of pages, they prefer to dig into the material at hand, aiming for depth. They will doubt the seminar, doubt the readings, doubt the instructor, even doubt themselves. Their contribution to the group will be immense and unique. C. The Alpine Swifts. Perhaps not as motivated as the cranes or as intense as the owls, the Swifts will nevertheless fly the longest distances. They will continue reading on the subject long after the seminar has come to an end, even long after they have graduated. D. The robins. Content with the minimum, concerned more about the grade they will receive at the end than about the intellectual challenges along the way, timid and reluctant to go beyond surface-level thinking, the robins will in all likelihood derive the least from the seminar. Rules of the seminar: all ideas, provided they are supported by research, a skillful presentation and an openness of mind, are welcome. Eating during class does not constitute a problem. In truth, food, within reason, don't go overboard, and beverages, non-alcoholic, we need our brains sober, are encouraged, not only because they lift the mood and help the intellect to focus, but also because it is hard to feel hostile towards someone you share bread with. Ergo, share your food with fellow classmates, especially with those who oppose your views. Bullying, tyranny, hate speech or malicious conduct against other students will not be tolerated, nor will it be allowed against your tutor. Needless to say, taking offense will not be permitted either. By agreeing to join the seminar, you are entering a tacit agreement to give primacy to freedom of speech over your personal sensitivities. If you cannot stand hearing objectionable ideas, we cannot have a free debate. When you feel offended, which is human, remember the counsel of a wise man: if you are irritated by every rub, how will your mirror be polished? If you think you already know all you need to know about God and are not interested in filling your mind with new information, kindly stay away and stand out of my light. Time is precious, mine and yours. This seminar is for the seekers. Those who are willing to be a beginner every single morning. If all this seems like too much drudgery, bear in mind the highest activity a human being can attain is learning for understanding, because to understand is to be free. The Marketing Strategy. Istanbul, 2016. Two maids, wearing starched black uniforms, crisp white aprons and identical expressions, bustled in bearing crystal plates of chocolatey truffles. Everyone, try them. They're my babies, said the businessman's wife. This, too, had been in the newspapers. The businessman had taken over a chocolate factory that had gone bankrupt. As an anniversary gift to his wife, he had put her in charge of production and marketing. She had changed the name of the factory to Atelier and called the brand Les Bonbons du Harem. Turkish customers could not pronounce the name in full, but its Frenchness, Europeanness, otherness was enough to make the product desirable. Sophisticated, a la mode. Now the hostess enthused, just taste one, I reckon you'll eat your fingers too. The guests leaned forward to examine the delicacies, neatly arranged on lacy paper doilies. We've named them after world cities. See the one with raspberries, that's Amsterdam. This with marzipan, Madrid. Berlin is with beer and ginger. London, with aged whiskey. When it comes to ingredients, we spare no expense. You can say that again, chimed in the businessman. She insisted, onusing 18-year-old single malt. It will ruin me. The guests laughed. Ignoring the interruption, the hostess said, I'm no longer called the businessman's wife. From now on I am a businesswoman in my own right. The guests cheered. Emboldened, the businesswoman carried on, Venice, with cherry liquor. Milano, we've made with amaretto. Zurich, cognac and passion fruit. And Paris, with champagne. Tell them about your marketing strategy, said the businessman. We have two selections, for the toper and the teetotal, the businesswoman explained. Same box, different products. To Europe and Russia, we export truffles with alcohol. To the Middle East, the ones without. Smart, don't you think? Do the halal chocolates also have names? Asked the journalist. Sure, darling. The businesswoman pointed at the next crystal plate. Medina, with dates. Dubai, coconut cream. Amman, caramel and hazelnuts. That pink one with rosewater, Isfahan. How about Istanbul? Asked Perrier. How can we forget, said the businesswoman. Istanbul had to be based on contrasts, vanilla custard meets cracked black pepper. As they kept chattering and devouring the truffles, the maids began to serve hot drinks. Most of the women opted for chamomile or black tea, while most of the men asked for coffee, espresso, americano. No one at table requested Turkish coffee, except for the American hedge fund manager, who was determined to adhere to the maxim when in Rome, although in this case the Romans themselves behaved as though they were not in Rome. Eager to do things the local way, the American asked, "Can someone read me a cup afterwards?" "Don't worry," the businesswoman replied in English. "You don't have to save coffee grounds. The psychic will be here any minute now." "I can't wait for him to arrive," said the journalist's girlfriend. "I need some time with him." Perry looked around. These were God-fearing, husband-fearing, divorce-fearing, poverty-fearing, terrorism-fearing, crowd-fearing, disgrace-fearing, madness-fearing women, whose houses were immaculately clean, whose minds were clear about what they expected from the future. Early on in their lives they had exchanged the art of coaxing the father for the art of coaxing the husband. Those who had been married long enough had become bolder and louder in their opinions, yet they knew when not to cross the line. Perry, for her part, did not share their concerns. She had never feared her father, never feared her husband, and, as for God, though not always on the best of terms, she was determined not to fear him either. The true source of her uneasiness was of a different nature. It was she herself, her own darkness, that filled her with trepidation. "Hey, we're not going to let that psychic have private sessions with all the pretty women," said the businessman. Under his breath he added a steeless joke, to which the male guests responded with guffaws and the female guests with feigned deafness. Perry recalled how easily Shireen used to swear in public, waving her hands as if swatting a fly that kept irritating her. She remembered that she, too, swore when she was in Oxford, though only once, giving a mouthful to Professor Asa when she was upset with him. How easy it was to hate a loved one. Here in this land, there were two kinds of women, those who used profanity with abandon and did not give a damn about the stigma of indecency, a tiny minority, and those who at no time would do so, the majority. The middle to upper class ladies at the dinner belonged to these conned group. They never cursed, except when they spoke English or French or German. It was somehow all right to swear in a foreign language. An obscenity they would not dream of uttering in their mother tongue, they sang out in a European language without a trace of guilt. It was easier, and somehow less offensive, to say the unsayable in someone else's language, like a masquerade party goer dropping her guard behind a costume and a mask. Men, on the other hand, were free to use expletives and did so generously and not always out of anger. Swearing cut across the class spectrum. It bound the male species together. "By the way, there are a couple of truffles we haven't named yet," said the businesswoman. "One is with sherry and lemon zest. Tonight, Parasim, you gave me an idea. Let's call it Oxford." Having said that, the businesswoman stood up, searching the plates. "Ah, there it is." With her little finger curled daintily, she picked up the chocolate ball and offered it to Perry. "Try it." Under everyone's gaze, Perry popped it into her mouth, the flavors dissolving on her tongue. Beneath the initial sweetness a sharp citrusy tang hit her palate, both tempting and deceiving in a single bite, like these minars of Professor Eza. The Deadly Kiss Oxford, 2001. Perry did not go home over the Easter holiday. She still had to get used to the way the academic year was divided into 3 terms in England. The long breaks always threw her off. Not only because she couldn't travel back home as frequently as the rest of the students. Not only because she was neither an extrovert nor an explorer and therefore disinclined to investigate her surroundings. But also because she felt the gulf between herself and the others more acutely during these times. When everyone was writing essays, attending lectures, she could easily go with the flow, but she didn't know what to do with herself when she was expected to relax and have some fun. Nonetheless, that same week she received an unexpected invitation. Mona, who had also stayed around after the term, running from one social activity to another, as was her habit, had 2 cousins visiting from America. Together they were planning to travel to the Welsh countryside, where they had rented a cottage. Why don't you come with us, said Mona. You'll enjoy it. Lots of fresh air. Filling her suitcase with more books, including 2 by Professor Eza than she could possibly read in a week, Perry agreed to join them. She wished Mona would be mostly preoccupied with her relatives. She would be in company and alone at once. It sounded tolerable. She was taken aback the first time she saw road signs in Welsh and English. Until then it had never occurred to her that you could have more than one official language inside the same country. In Turkey she had never come across a public notice in Turkish and Kurdish. Such was her surprise that every time she spotted one she had to stop to photograph it. You are crazy, said Mona, laughing. The landscape is stunning and Duri photographing road signs. The views were glorious indeed. Sheep with their newborn lambs grazing in fields that were rife with color, carpets of green dotted with purple heathers, bluebells, and cuckoo flowers. Their holiday rental turned out to be a tiny, timber-framed, whitewashed cottage high up on the west side of Avali. In the mornings it was bathed in a splendid sun, in the afternoons, a deep shade of tranquility. In the distance the river Wye ran like a sinuous silver thread, winding its way between the hillsides. Perry loved the cottage, the cast iron stove, the low ceilings, the logs piled outside, flagstone ground floors, even the smell of the sheets that always felt ice cold when you first got into bed. She shared the room with Mona and the cousins took the next room. Although the nearest village was a mile away, there was so much to do during the day, she had little time to read. She, who had always been a city girl, observed nature with a curious delight, the wonders in little things, and it felt like this was all that mattered, those little things. Always jumping to negative thoughts, she imagined a catastrophe had happened, a nuclear bomb, and they were the only survivors, away from civilization. She knew her mother would be shocked if she saw her daughter staying here, 4 girls in the middle of nowhere. One night from her bed, she watched Mona praying in a corner, her face turned towards Mecca. They had not talked about religion at all, both often avoiding the topic. Had Shireen been with them, she would surely have brought it up. When Mona switched off the light, a sudden silence descended upon the room. Perry tossed and turned. When I was a child, I was stung by a bee on me lip, she muttered slowly, as if she were dusting off the memory. Mimmoth became so swollen it looked like a water balloon. My father said the bee was madly in love with me. It wanted to kiss me. I always wondered, did it know it would die as soon as it used its stinger? Weird, isn't it, if it knows it and does it anyway? Self-destruction. Mona rolled on her side. In the moonlight from the window her silhouette resembled a sculpture. Only humans have consciousness. It's the divine order. That's why Allah holds us humans responsible for our behavior. But you see, animals don't want to die. They have a survival instinct. Then they go and sting. They must know they're taking their own lives. I mean, you look at nature and you think, wow, how lovely and sweet. In fact, it's awfully cruel. Mona sighed. You're not running the world, remember. He is in charge of everything, not you. Have faith. How could Perry possibly trust a system in which bees were destined to die no sooner than they fell in love? And if this were the divine order that people raved about, how could they call it just and holy? She pulled up the quilt to her chin, feeling cold. Perry screamed out in her sleep that night and murmured words in Turkish that sounded like the hum of 1,000 bees trying to break free. The cousins, awakened by the noise, giggled from the next room. Mona sat up in her bed, astounded. She prayed that whatever demons were harassing her friend would be dispelled far and wide. The next morning they all returned to Oxford. Whenever Mona and Perry talked about their trip to Wales, it would be with a buoyant smile, even though each had sensed in her own way, that beneath the special moments lay something darker. The empty page. Istanbul, summer 2001. Her first year at Oxford finally over, Perry spent the holidays in Istanbul. Every now and then, her mother mentioned this or that young man in passing, using the same set of descriptors. For Selma, Perry's education was less an intellectual awakening or the precursor to a promising career than a brief interlude before her wedding. She had gone to 7 shrines just this past month, lighting candles, tying strips of silk and uttering wishes for a forthcoming good marriage for her daughter. New neighbors moved in while you were away. Decent family, said Selma, as she pawed the pile of broad beans that she was preparing for dinner. They have a son. Such a clever boy, handsome, honorable. You mean you found me a suitable husband, murmured Perry. Chet whirled a tuft of hair around her finger, pulling awkwardly. She noticed it was much shorter than the rest and had a sudden creepy suspicion that her mother had cut a lock of her hair while she was sleeping. The idea that her hair was now in one of those shrines, buried among Selma's offerings, made her slightly ill. Leave the girl alone, woman, said Mensur from his chair. You're confusing her. She's got classes to focus on. We're after a diploma, not a husband. This boy has a diploma, protested Selma. He went to university. They can get engaged now and marry after she graduates. What does she have, Tolos? Only my freedom and my youth and my mind, said Perry. You talk just like your father, Selma said, and went back to her beans as if she'd proved her point. The subject was closed, but not for long. End of summer, on a balmy day in Istanbul, Perry went out shopping. A raincoat, a new pair of running shoes, a backpack, she had to purchase them before she left for Oxford. When she got off the bus, near Taksim Square, she spotted a crowd of people. They were standing on the pavement, in front of a tea house frequented by students, staring through the open windows at the TV blaring away inside. Shadows danced on their contours, brushed by an apricot light where the sun caught their profiles. A broad-shouldered man had placed his hands on his forehead, his brows drawn together. A girl with a ponytail looked startled, her body rigid. Their expressions irked Perry. She inched her way through the group, curiously. That was when she saw what was on TV, a plane slamming into a skyscraper against a blue so bright it almost hurt her eyes. The scene was being played over and over, as if in slow motion, though each time it seemed less real. Billows of smoke rose from the building. Sheets of paper drifted aimlessly in the wind. As though catapulted from a sling, an object hurtled downward, then another. Perry gasped, only now realizing these were no mere objects, but humans plunging to their deaths. Americans, the man beside her muttered. That's what you get when you meddle in other people's affairs. Well, they thought they ruled the world, didn't they, said a woman, and shook her head, sending her hoop earrings swaying. Now they know they're mortal, like the rest of us. Perry's eyes met the ponytailed girl's. For a second it seemed only the two of them were feeling the sorrow, the shock, the terror. But the girl quickly averted her gaze, offering little camaraderie. Disturbed by the talk around her, Perry strode away, her head bursting with questions. Wherever she turned, she found people looking for conspiracy theories to feed on, like foraging bees buzzing about for nectar. I must call Shireen, she thought to herself. In need of hearing her friend's confident voice, she rang her from a payphone. Thankfully, she answered immediately. Hey, Perry. Fucked up world, eh? May we live in interesting times, it's just horrible, said Perry. I don't know what to make of this. Innocents slaughtered, cut in Shireen almost shouting. Why? Because some depraved bastards believe they'll go to paradise if they kill in the name of God. It'll get worse, you'll see. Now all Muslims will be vilified. More innocents will have to suffer from all sides. Perry noticed a wad of chewing gum had been stuck under the phone box, a small act of malice, but malice nonetheless. Awful. Atrocious. And so scary. How could this happen? Well, I'm sure that's what everyone will be arguing about. For months, years even. Journalists, experts, academics. But really there's nothing to discuss. Religion fuels intolerance, and that leads to hatred, and that leads to violence. End of story. But isn't that unfair? Perry said. There are many religious people. How I'll never hurt anyone. It wasn't religion that did this. It was pure evil. You know what, Mouse, I'm not going to argue with you. This time, I'm as confused as you are. I need to talk to Asa or I'll go mad. Perry felt a jolt inside of her. You're going to see him? But the term hasn't started yet. Who cares? I'm going up to Oxford tomorrow. I know he's there. Change your ticket, come with me. I'll try, said Perry. She didn't feel the need to point out that even if she could get a last-minute ticket, she couldn't afford it. At home, Perry found her mother and her father as bewildered as she was, watching the same scenes on TV that were being run repeatedly. Fanatics are taking control of the world, said Mensur. He had started drinking earlier than usual, and by the look of him he had already downed quite a few. For the first time he seemed hesitant about his daughter going to Oxford. Maybe we shouldn't have sent you abroad, nowhere is safe anymore. I never thought I would say this, but maybe Thuist has now become more dangerous than the East, West. What difference does it make? No one can escape their kismet, said Selma. If Allah has written it on your forehead with his invisible ink, it doesn't matter whether you are here or in China. Death will come and find you. At this, Mensur grabbed the ballpoint pen he used for crossword puzzles and wrote in a squiggly line on his forehead the number 100. What are you doing? asked Selma. Changing my fate. I'm going to live 100 years. Perry did not stay around to hear what her mother said in return. She had no patience for her parents' quarrels. Seized by an acute sense of loneliness, she went to her room and took out her God diary. As much as she tried to compose something sensible, she could not write. Not today. She had so many questions about religion and faith and God, the kind of God that allowed atrocities to happen and still expected obedience. She stared at the page, swallowed by its emptiness. She wondered what Asa would tell Shireen when the two of them met in his office. How she wished she could secretly sneak into that room, like the Siskin, and eavesdrop. She, too, had things to ask the professor. Perhaps Shireen was right to insist. Perry needed a seminar on God, not so much to discover new truths about a supreme being as to make sense of the simmering uncertainties within herself. Then she did something she would never tell anyone. She prayed for all the people killed in the Twin Towers. She prayed for their families and loved ones. And before she concluded her prayer, she added a small request to God to be admitted into as a seminar, so that she could learn more about him and hopefully make some sense of the chaos both inside and outside her mind.